It had been a typical Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where time seemed to stretch on endlessly, but I had a feeling that something was different. Mark had left early to meet some friends for lunch, and I was alone at home with my stepson, Ben. He was 18 now, still adjusting to living with us full-time after his mother had moved out of state. I'd always done my best to be there for him, but if I'm being honest, the distance between us had only grown over the past year. I didn't know exactly what was going on in his head. He was closed off, kept to himself a lot, and honestly, I didn't know how to break through. It wasn't that Ben was a bad kid, far from it. He was polite, respectful, but there was always a wall between us. He was quieter than usual lately, and I couldn't help but feel like something was weighing on him. I tried not to push too hard, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that he was struggling with something I couldn't see. As I was cleaning the living room, I'd heard footsteps from upstairs, followed by the door to his room creaking open. I glanced at the clock. It was nearing dinner time, and I figured I'd take this opportunity to check in with him. Maybe he needed someone to talk to. Or maybe he just wanted to be left alone, like he always did. I knocked softly on his door before pushing it open a little. Ben was sitting at his desk, his back turned toward me. He was hunched over something, scribbling furiously on a notepad. I couldn't see what it was, but there was a tension in his posture, something different about the way he was sitting, like he was trying to block me out. "Hey, Ben," I said gently, stepping into the room. "You doing okay?" He didn't turn around at first. He just kept scribbling, his eyes focused intently on whatever was in front of him. I took a step closer, hesitant, but wanting to break through to him. "It's okay to talk about things, you know. You don't have to keep everything bottled up." Finally, he looked up, his face flushed with frustration. His eyes flicked over to mine for a moment, then quickly darted back down to the notepad. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice sharp. I could feel my heart sink a little. The defensive tone in his voice stung, but I tried not to take it personally. "You don't have to pretend like everything's okay if it's not," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm here if you need me, Ben. I know things have been tough lately, but you don't have to go through it alone." For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, without warning, he stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. "I don't need help. I'm fine." He turned away quickly, his body tense, his hands shaking just slightly. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. The look in his eyes, the way his voice had cracked for just a second, it all told me that something was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, he needed someone to break down the wall he had put up around himself. "Ben," I said quietly, stepping closer. "You don't have to go through this on your own. Whatever it is, you can tell me." He stiffened, then quickly spun around to face me, his eyes wide with frustration. "I'm not some little kid, okay? I don't need anyone trying to fix me." His voice was louder now, defensive, but I could see the pain lurking beneath it. It wasn't anger, it was fear. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. This wasn't the time for me to back down, even though everything in me told me to step back and give him space. I could feel the weight of the silence between us as I searched for the right words. "I'm not trying to fix you, Ben," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just want to be there for you. I care about you, and if something's bothering you, I want to help however I can." He seemed to soften for a moment, but then quickly shut down again, turning away. "I'm fine," he repeated, almost as if trying to convince himself. "I just want to be left alone." I didn't push any further. I could see how much he was fighting against whatever emotions he was dealing with, and I wasn't going to force him to talk. Not yet. But I wasn't going to give up on him either. Not when I could see how badly he was struggling beneath the surface. "I'll be downstairs if you need me," I said quietly, stepping back toward the door. "Just know that I'm here." I closed the door behind me, the silence in the house suddenly feeling heavier. My heart ached for him, for the pain I could see he was carrying but refused to share. He was pushing me away, but I wasn't going anywhere. He might not be ready to open up yet, but I would be here, waiting for him to come to me when he was. As I sat back down in the living room, my thoughts lingered on Ben. I knew something was wrong, something deeper than he was letting on. And I was determined to help him through it, no matter how long it took. But as I sat there, I had no idea that the next conversation we had would change everything between us. The next few days felt like a slow unraveling. I tried to give Ben space, respecting his boundaries, but every time I looked at him, I could see the distance in his eyes. It was as if something inside him had shut down, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach him. My heart ached for him. I knew he was struggling, but I had no idea how deep the pain went. That evening, after dinner, I found myself in the kitchen, cleaning up while Mark was watching TV. Ben hadn't said much during the meal. He'd barely touched his food. It was hard to ignore how much things had changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. It wasn't just the quiet in the house, it was the silence between us, between me and Ben. I heard the soft sound of footsteps from upstairs. The floorboards creaked slightly, and I looked up, almost expecting Ben to walk into the kitchen. Instead, the footsteps faded, and the house returned to its quiet rhythm. But the unease in my chest grew. After a few minutes, I decided to go check on him again. I knocked gently on his door, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open slowly, knowing he probably didn't want me there, but something inside told me I had to check on him. When I stepped inside, the sight before me made my heart race. Ben was sitting at his desk again, but this time, he wasn't just writing. He was staring at something on his computer screen, his face pale, his eyes locked in a mixture of fear and something darker, something I didn't recognize. I froze in the doorway, my stomach twisting. It was like something wasn't right. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel the weight of whatever was happening in that moment. I had no idea what I had walked into, but I couldn't back out now. "Ben," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm, despite the sudden rush of panic. "What's going on?" He didn't look up at me immediately. His hands were shaking, and his breath was shallow. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had stopped, like the space between us had closed in, and nothing else mattered except that one moment. I don't want you to see this," he finally whispered, his voice cracking as he quickly tried to minimize the screen. But it was too late. I had already seen enough. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, unsure of what I was about to uncover. "Ben, what's happening? What are you hiding from me?" He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Please, just go," he pleaded, his voice shaky. "I don't want you to see this. It's not what you think." But it was too late. The images on the screen were burned into my mind. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the computer, from the pictures that made my stomach churn. They weren't just harmless images. There were things on that screen that made everything inside me freeze. It wasn't just the photos. It was the words he had written, dark, twisted thoughts that I couldn't make sense of. "I can't stop" was one of the phrases that repeated itself. "It feels good, but it's wrong" was another. I didn't know what to do, how to process what I was seeing. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine as I realized just how deep his struggle went. This wasn't something he could just ignore, and it wasn't something I could brush off. I stepped forward, my heart aching for him. "Ben, you need help. This isn't something you should be dealing with alone." He shook his head, his hands gripping the desk like he was trying to hold onto something. "No," he said, almost pleading. "Please don't tell anyone. I don't want them to know. I don't want you to think I'm messed up." I walked closer, my heart aching for the boy I had tried so hard to understand. I didn't know how to help him, but I knew this wasn't something that could be ignored. "Ben, I'm not going to leave you alone with this," I said firmly, my voice shaking with emotion. "You don't have to go through this by yourself. But you need to tell me what's going on." He looked up at me, his face filled with shame, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the real Ben. The boy beneath the walls he had built up around himself. "I don't know what's wrong with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to stop thinking about it. It's like I can't control it anymore. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to hurt anyone." My heart broke for him. I could see the pain, the confusion in his eyes, and I knew I had to act. I couldn't just let him suffer in silence. "You're not broken," I said, kneeling beside him. "You're not messed up. But you need help. We can figure this out together. You're not alone in this." He didn't say anything for a long moment, just staring at the floor, trying to hide his face from me. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll talk to someone." The room was heavy with emotion as I sat beside him, knowing that this wasn't the end of his struggle, but the beginning of his journey toward healing. It would take time, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the right path. As I left his room later that night, I knew that our relationship had changed. We had crossed a line, but it wasn't the kind of line that couldn't be mended. We had faced the darkness together, and now it was time to start the process of healing. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he wasn't alone anymore. And neither was I.